Some of my fondest gaming memories come from this gem this game right here. Just as my interest in WCW had sort of peaked in 96 through 98, my WWF fandom would reach brand new heights in the year 1999. Right as my favorite wrestling game developer was taking over the task of creating the new WWF game on the Nintendo 64. Only a year after creating my favorite wrestling video game of all time, WCW NWO Revenge. But how did one company end up creating games for two rival wrestling promotions? During the rise of WCW, THQ had landed the publishing rights to the promotion's games, enlisting the developmental services of Aki Corporation for its Nintendo 64 catalog, beginning with 1997's WCW vs. NWO World Tour, which would win the award for Fighting Game of the Year. 1998 would see the much-anticipated follow-up, WCW NWO Revenge, which would not only win Fighting Game of the Year yet again, but would also become one of the best-selling games on the console, moving nearly 1.9 million copies during its life cycle. But let's rewind a bit before the release of Revenge, going back to March of 1998, where WCW would announce they would not be renewing their partnership with THQ and would instead be teaming up with the larger Electronic Arts in what would be a 5-year, $10 million publishing deal starting in 1999. This wasn't good news for THQ, as WCW products made up nearly 40% of the publisher's revenues for 1997. News of the split caused THQ's stock to drop 24% and caused some alarm for those within the company. THQ CEO Brian Farrell would go on record to say, "Since we have been extremely successful with our line of wrestling products utilizing the WCW license, we fully intend to continue in the genre with outstanding wrestling games." And continue they would, because it just so happened that the World Wrestling Federation was also ending their long-term deal with publisher Acclaim, making 1999's summer release of WWF Attitude the duo's last hurrah. So with THQ looking to release more wrestling games thanks to their success in the genre, and the WWF looking for a new developer, it would seem only right that the two would sit down and talk business. And in early 1999, the two companies would announce their new 10-year partnership, with THQ Senior Vice President Michael Haller saying this about the deal. THQ is the premier publisher of wrestling games. With the #1 license in wrestling, unrivaled wrestling development talent, and our proven publishing expertise, THQ is poised to maintain its lead in this highly competitive genre. With future game releases slated across multiple platforms, the first scheduled title would be planned for the Nintendo 64 and would include the development team that created the two blockbuster WCW releases for the console. The best part? This was set for a holiday 1999 release, mere months after Acclaim's final WWF venture. Now, I was a freshman in high school during this time, and I can still remember when this news hit. Me and my friends couldn't believe it. We were all really big fans of wrestling, and the WWF was completely on fire at the time. The thought of being able to play WCW Revenge with the likes of Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, DX, and other WWF superstars was kind of mind-blowing. I remember a group of us huddling around an issue of Game Pro or Game Informer, trying to catch screenshots of the game in its early stages. I can remember hearing about the name, WrestleMania 2000, and the excitement was building with every single magazine preview or online screenshot that I saw. And this excitement would all come to a head as on October 31st, 1999, WWF Wrestlemania 2000 would hit US store shelves. Nintendo's decision to stick with cartridges in a market that had shifted to compact discs would prove to have its hurdles. Games over on the PlayStation and Sega Saturn had the ability to feature full motion video and digital audio, which was used quite frequently for wrestling game intros, but here developers had to create opening scenes that included in-game models, yet the team did not let that hinder their progress. If anything, it helped to give us something more unique, creative, and impressive than what we were used to. But in fact, this was nothing new, as Aki had already ventured down this road, creating spectacular intros for the two N64 WCW games that preceded this one. The Attitude Era was gaining more popularity than ever thanks to the likes of edgier superstars, wild storylines, great factions, and the overall unpolished and gritty vibe that had become the WWF. All of this is captured here perfectly in the game's introduction, and it's safe to say that those booting this one up for the first time were coming to the realization of what was in store. Now let's talk roster. By 1999, a lot of the wrestlers that were just getting their feet wet in the mid-90s were becoming megastars. Meanwhile, some household names of yesteryear were being repackaged to fit the new image of the promotion. Add to that some fresh new faces that would become the future of the company, and you get quite the selection here. Since WWF Attitude released just months before WrestleMania 2000, it's easy to see the similarities between the two, though there are a few wrestlers from the former that were not included here, such as Owen Hart, Dr. Death, and Mark Marrow, amongst a few others. Some of the additions seen here would come in the form of the Hardy Boys, Meat, Blue Meanie, Albert, and Test, but the two most noteworthy would be the recent WCW acquisitions of Chris Jericho and The Big Show, both of whom appeared in 1998's WCW NWO Revenge. This would mark the third appearance in an Aki-developed title for The Big Show, who was also included in the 1997 release WCW vs. NWO World Tour. While WWF Attitude would feature only 3 Diva options, this one would offer up more variety in that category, with inclusions like Chyna, Deborah, Ivory, Jacqueline, Tori, and more. Throughout the years, many hackers have been able to get into the game's files and locate information on additional talent, including Owen Hart, Goldust, Tiger Ali Singh, Gilbert, Sable, Nicole Bass, and Ryan Shamrock. And while it's never been confirmed whether any of these were intended to be included in the game, it's safe to assume that it was at least a possibility, with references to them existing within the game's data. Each wrestler features 4 glorious attire slots with a lot of relevant options available here, so even though Triple H was wearing these trunks during the release of the game, they still included options like his long silver tights or The Rock's post-breast surgery tracksuit, not to mention multiple looks for the Dead Man, and though he had only been in the Federation for a short time at this point, we see 4 unique attires for Test. Now this, in its own respect, is a wonderful inclusion, but to top things off, each of them can be fully customized via the game's Create a Wrestler mode. Sure, we've seen this in later games, and it's become even more common in recent years, but for the time, this opened up a lot of opportunity for roster customization. You can change any wrestler's hair, clothing, accessories, tattoos, entrance gear. It was truly groundbreaking in my eyes at the time. I mean, if I wanted to see classic Taker with the purple gloves, all I had to do was edit a few gear options and bam, there he is. Did you prefer Triple H as a member of DX? Make it happen. Remember when Stone Cold was a Hollywood blonde? Yeah, it may have happened in another promotion, but screw it. Want to see Kane without his mask? Oh, yeah, let's put that back on you, buddy. This was truly great, and this didn't just work for past gimmicks, because fast forward a few years and I would bust this game out in the early to mid 2000s, updating the game's roster to reflect the current product at the time. Something that would become quite popular within the game's community along the years. So you've selected your favorite wrestler, and the match begins. Hold on, wait a minute. Rewind, because I have something very important to talk about here. Now, this game featured a feature that featured feature. Now, this game included something that no other WWF game to this point had featured. Something that stopped me dead in my tracks. This game had Titantron videos. As an absolute self-admitted entrance junkie, this was bigger than big for me. Sure, they don't look fantastic thanks to the limitations of the N64's cartridge capabilities, and they only actually display during the stage portions of entrances, but good God, man, they were here. This was the future happening right before my eyes. I always died a little bit inside playing Attitude, watching that blank, depressing Titantron displaying absolutely nothing. We also get accurate entrance themes for each wrestler, something that wasn't included in Revenge and was one of the few complaints critics had about that game. Again, due to the hardware, these themes aren't the highest of quality, and some of them get to a point where they just sort of loop endlessly. But nevertheless, when you aren't expecting something at all, you can appreciate that of which you do receive, and I was very appreciative of these inclusions. As wrestlers make their way to the ring, we see two different renders of the arena model, with a close-up version of the set and stage area used for the first part of entrances, while the remainder of the entrance, as well as matches, takes place in the model of the arena where the ring is the focal point, and the stage area appears as a low-poly version or a straight-up 2D image depending on the arena. As a teenager playing this, I didn't really understand why they did this. It was even done back on Revenge and would return with WWF No Mercy, but as time would progress and I would get a little older, it would only make sense that this was done to help with the game's performance. I never truly understood at the time just how far a lot of this hardware was being pushed. One might even remember the tremendous slowdown that would occur on the stage area in Revenge whenever pyro was going off. Yeah, that wasn't just a cool effect. As gaming would progress through the years that followed this generation, entrances would become fully rendered start-to-finish animations, which usually creates a seamless visual, but entrances in these Aki titles were comprised by linking together location-specific taunts, accompanied by a handful of walking animation options, which sometimes resulted in a more robotic-looking series of movements, but nevertheless, they were still able to deliver some pretty great-looking entrances here. Because one thing that can be said about this series of games is that the animations were spot on. From Stone Cold Steve Austin's purposeful march towards the ring, or that famous turnbuckle pose, to Kane setting off his pyro, X-Pac's crotch chop, and by God, the Brood actually rising from the flames. The addition of tag team entrances was yet another innovative feature and could be applied to any set of wrestlers you'd like by simply giving them the same entrance theme and movie. You'll also see managers accompanying certain wrestlers down to the ring, which was also a nice touch, even if they can and probably will interfere in your match. Maybe these haven't aged as well as I would have liked, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't absolutely happy with these back in 1999. Okay. Now that we've spent, 45 minutes going over entrances, we can finally get to the main reason people tend to really enjoy these titles: the gameplay. The N64 controller seems to pair rather nicely with Nintendo-developed games, but some of the third-party releases were hit or miss when it came to button mapping. This series of wrestling titles seemed to utilize the unconventional controller in ways that many others just couldn't. I can remember the first time playing WCW vs NWO World Tour and being blown away how easy the game was to pick up and play, even for a kid such as myself. Instead of movement being controlled by the analog stick, it is instead assigned to the D-pad, with A used to initiate grapples and B for strikes. Holding either of these buttons will result in strong versions of said commands. So if you're looking to strike your foe with a few quick attacks, you'll want to tap the B button. But if you want to knock them down with a punishing blow, you'll hold it. Tap A for a weak tie-up, hold it for a strong variation, which opens up a more devastating selection of grapple moves. But rushing into these stronger versions of strikes and grapples too early into a match will often result in them being blocked or reversed. So it's important to first wear down your foe a bit. Otherwise, these moves are simple enough to pull off, as once a tie-up has been initiated, all you have to do is tap either A or B. Doing so while pressing a directional button will perform additional moves, with one move mapped to both left and right, and one each for up and down respectively, meaning there is quite the selection here. Let's do the math. Weak grapple with A plus 3 directional moves, and then you got weak B plus 3, in addition to strong with A and B plus 3 directions each. That's 16 unique moves just in the front grapples alone. Times 2 once you calculate the same for back grapples, and you're at 32. And yeah, that's pretty impressive. Because we haven't even tackled the ground grapples, corner grapples, Irish whip grapples, or apron grapples. and there are weak and strong versions of nearly all of those as well. The only grapples that we don't see in which the game would have benefited from is running grapples, but that would be included in the game's sequel, WWF No Mercy. The C buttons are used for additional commands such as running, entering and exiting the ring, tagging in partners, climbing turnbuckles, and other fun little things, while shoulder buttons are used to pin and pick up opponents as well as blocking and countering. Blocks are used to fend off enemy strikes by pressing or holding the R button, while the L button can not only reverse and stop grapple moves dead in their tracks, but can also evade a grapple altogether if timed just right. Holding R upon getting up off the mat will result in your wrestler getting into this crouching position where rolls, grapples, and attacks can be executed. I know many of us have spammed that nut punch here in this situation quite a bit. I know I'm guilty of it. The analog stick serves two main purposes here, the first one being taunting. Ah yes, they truly captured the Attitude Era here, with Austin flipping the birds, X-Pac chopping crotch, Mankind putting on Mr. Socko, and of course Mr. Ass showing his ass. The second purpose of the control stick is finishing moves. Now, most grapplers leading up to these games featured a life or health meter, with the purpose being to drain it in order to pull off finishers and successfully get that 3 count. What we see here is a momentum-based system where finishers are made possible by filling the attitude meter down here, which is achieved by performing moves, taunting, reversing, basically by dominating your opponent, which in return will lower their attitude, thus putting them in a state of danger. As this meter increases, it will gradually grow more red until it's finally flashing, signifying that you're ready to pull off your special move. Simply taunt to engage this ability, where your wrestler will have a limited amount of time to perform his or her finisher. This is done by performing a strong grapple, followed by a tap of the analog stick. This will usually result in your opponent's momentum taking quite the hit, making pinfalls more likely. The simplicity of this was a welcome change from the past WWF games, and meant that any and everybody could pick this one up and land a finisher on their opponent. Oh, and I almost forgot a really cool feature here, the ability to steal not only your opponent's taunt by rotating the analog stick in a circular motion, but also their finisher, which can be done by setting up for a special and pressing A and B simultaneously within a strong grapple. This was always especially insulting in multiplayer. I mean, there's nothing worse than one of your buddies landing your own finisher on you while he sits there grinning from ear to ear. Hashtag screw you, we're no longer. So as we've discussed, not only are the moves user-friendly, but most, if not all of them, look fantastic. Kane's chokeslam is probably one of the better depictions that I've seen, maybe even to this day. And this would also be the first time we see a really solid version of the rock bottom. And while the stunner wasn't terrible in the Acclaim titles, it definitely looks more impactful and authentic here. Signature moves like X-Pac's Bronco Buster, Undertaker's Old School, and Austin's Mudhole Stomping, just to name a few, turned out great. Not to mention all the little trademark strikes and attacks that most games would typically just make generic to each wrestler. We also see a lot of carryover from the previous games, so if Big Show's chokeslam looks familiar, there's good reason. But this also means that it's now easier than ever to accurately create your favorite wrestler that didn't get a feature in the game. Sure, I could make somebody that resembles Scott Hall in WWF Attitude, but if his finisher, taunts, and entrance aren't in the game, it just doesn't feel complete. But here they've included a vast arsenal of moves and taunts dating back to World Tour, which again really opens up the roster customization here. The selection of match types aren't game-changing here, but we do see a lot of what we would expect during the time, such as one-on-one matches, regular tag and tornado tags, triple threat, fatal four-way, the King of the Ring tournament, and of course a longtime personal favorite of mine, the Royal Rumble. Throw your big goofy opponent over the top rope and outlast the rest to win. I had a few buddies that would partake in this mode with me, and I have to say that this is the ultimate party match type. But that's kind of the norm for the entire game, or dare I say the entire series. This was probably some of the most fun I'd ever had up to this point in a multiplayer experience. We also see options for hardcore matches where one could simply pluck weapons from the crowd. Just don't drop them, or yeah, we'll see that happens. And the first blood stipulation makes its Aki debut here, with a first to bleed, she'll drop to their knees and lose the match. I can't say that I've ever been a huge fan of this stipulation, but I will admit it's definitely unpredictable, knowing that the match could end at any moment. The biggest shiny new object to grace the game would be the steel cage, and this was right before the WWF started using the more traditional chain link version that we know and love today. So what we see here is basically that big blue 80s cage, but painted black. Because attitude, pal. It wasn't used very often, but I'll always associate it with the 1999 St. Valentine's Day Massacre matchup between Mr. McMahon and Stone Cold. You know, the one where Big Show made his debut throwing Austin through the damn thing. Actually, I think that was the last time we would see it. Anyway, it's here and it's mighty big. I mean, seriously, check out the height on this thing. Now, this is how a cage match should be. The ropes are still usable, unlike previous WWF titles, but you can also smash your opponent into the cage face first. If you can keep your foe down long enough and your button mashing skills are up to par, you'll be able to climb up and over for the win. With 7 arenas to choose from, this one couldn't quite compete with some of the WCW games like Thunder and Mayhem, which both featured a vast number of options, but as far as WWF games go, this was more than we'd previously seen. The famous Attitude Era Raw is War arena makes an appearance here in all of its Titantron glory, and I have to say this is probably my favorite of the bunch, as it just looks so gosh darn good, especially up close. Sunday Night Heat would be much of the same, with the only changes coming in the form of new lower thirds and ring aprons. King of the Ring, SummerSlam, and Survivor Series all appear as they did in 1998, along with Royal Rumble 1999, and a modified version of WrestleMania 15, as it appears here with a custom WrestleMania 2000 set design, and is labeled as such, despite the fact that the event had not actually taken place yet as of the game's release, and would appear quite differently when it did. Each of these arenas feature unique aprons, pre-matchup graphics, and lower thirds, in addition to stage designs, and help to capture that authentic feel of the promotion. Now, the next topic of discussion caught me by surprise, because for some reason I seem to remember this game being critiqued for its visuals, but in my research all I could find was review after review praising the look of the game. EGM even stated, and I quote, "WrestleMania's graphics are some of the best in wrestling games." GamePro would give the graphics a 4.5 out of 5, which is what they gave the frickin' controls. Is this like some sort of Mandela effect? Well, okay, IGN didn't like the visuals, but that's really no surprise. Sure, the faces can sometimes look a bit weird, and the clipping issues are pretty much a constant, and yes, the wrestler models are all the same height and a bit on the blocky side, but I've always rather liked the way this one looks, from the cartoonish crowd holding their little signs to the comic book recreation of Earl Hebner. It all has a certain unique charm to it, and I love it. One area the game did receive some harsh judgment was the sound, and while I can agree that the quality isn't always the best, I can't agree with the claim that the soundtrack features irritating and redundant guitars. Yeah, they actually said that. IGN would state, if the music from Revenge didn't bother you, then you should be okay with this. Really? Look at this one. Tinny, dated music. There was also a lot of discussion regarding the lack of commentary and voice acting from the wrestlers, both of which were included in the 2 WWF games that preceded this one. But regardless of what the critics had to say, I truly enjoy the sound department here. From the guitar-driven themes to the referee counts and sound effects plucked straight out of Revenge. I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and it all sounds great to me. We've already discussed some of the Create-A-Wrestler features briefly, but it's time that we take a closer look at everything the mode has to offer here. Like a flashback to Revenge's costume edit, we get every single item that makes up each of the over 50 wrestlers on the game's roster, so you'll have access to The Rock's face, Mankind's shirt, Droz' tattoos, you get the picture. But additionally, we see some original inclusions here as well, and while this selection of unique attire pales in comparison to Attitude, there should be enough shirts, tights, elbow pads, boots, and other items here for most fans. While the face selections are all pre-assembled, you can select from different head shapes, hair options, and accessories like hats and sunglasses, which can all help to ensure that your created wrestler featuring Triple H's face doesn't look like, well, Triple H. This would also be the first game to allow the player to choose his or her own entrance gear, as well as weapons or props which your created wrestler will carry down to the ring with them. Cool. And one thing that truly set this one apart from other games in the genre is the fact that since you're essentially given the same tools used to create the included roster, your custom creations won't stand out amongst the in-game models. You can select a Titantron video and entrance theme for your wrestler, though the options are quite limited with only a few selections outside of the game's included wrestlers. But once you've decided which it'll be and thought up a name for your superstar, it's time to head over to the moves section, where the fun truly begins, because this is where you'll assign just about every single thing your wrestler does, from the way he walks down to the ring to punches and kicks, and of course, finishers. And I've spent many hours here customizing my wrestlers down to every last detail, because even though it may seem a bit tedious and time-consuming, especially given the sheer amount of moves included in this game, it's absolutely addictive. Looking back on this mode, it truly stands out as one of the main reasons I enjoyed playing this game. Recreating a lot of my favorite wrestlers from the past, or those that were in rival promotions during the time, not to mention random pop culture icons, and of course completely original wrestlers to help expand on my fantasy WWF roster. Throw in a create a belt mode where championships can be customized. Well, sort of. This is the extent of your options, but they can be defended, even though you'll never actually see your wrestler in possession of the title. Okay, so they're not really in the game, but you gotta use your imagination a little bit. Top this off with a create a pay-per-view feature, and you should have plenty to keep you busy outside of the exhibition mode. But if you're still looking for more, the game's Road to WrestleMania might be what you're looking for. Pick a superstar and jump into the chaos that is the hunt for WWF Gold. This one takes place over the course of a year, beginning in April, where the player must first rise through the ranks of the lower card, battling it out in exhibition matches on episodes of Sunday Night Heat and Monday Night Raw, each featuring these cool little cinematic openings. Earning wins will eventually lead to title shots where multiple belts can be held at one time, which also means multiple title defenses on a single card. While this mode is essentially a very long series of matches, you will come across the occasional cutscene, more often than not a call-out, sometimes from one of the game's hidden wrestlers, typically resulting in a match which can lead to the superstar being unlocked. Complete the entire Road to WrestleMania, and you'll gain access to the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels, who was technically retired from the ring during this time, but was included in a lot of games during this era for obvious reasons. This mode may feel a bit primitive these days, but was a breath of fresh air at the time, and helped the game stand out amongst those that preceded it. The game would receive praise from critics pretty much unanimously, with the magazine Game Fan rating it a perfect 100%. By January of 2000, over 1 million copies had sold, and as of today, it's considered one of the greatest wrestling games of all time. This one is definitely one of my all-time favorites. How does it rate with you? Feel free to share some of your memories in the comments section, and don't forget to like the video, because if you don't, YouTube will not allow me to make any more of them. No, but seriously, please take a second to like and subscribe, as it will keep you informed on future uploads and helps do something else with the algorithm that I don't quite understand, but nevertheless, it does help. Until next time, I hope that everybody out there is doing well, and I hope that you'll have me back for the next video. Take care. They said it, not me.